Go ahead.
What makes a wise man? What are the characteristics that define a man of wisdom? These are questions that must be examined by those who wish to live in a wise manner. Wisdom, according to the Bible, is to be valued more than gold and silver and is an essential tool for life. Solomon, who God granted anyone wish, asked that he might be given wisdom. God, pleased with Solomon, gave him his wish, and Solomon thus became one of the wisest and most successful men in the world. The path to wisdom is long and hard, filled with traps and snares ready to lead one astray. However, those who continue to pursue wisdom will have the reward. For a life of wisdom in due course leads to a fulfilled and complete existence. In the pursuit of wisdom, the past becomes the key to the future. For those who study the lives of men who have come before them, will ultimately become wiser by understanding where some men have failed and where others have had success. When tackling a topic such as wisdom, one must go about it in a methodical manner, or risk missing important details and ideas. Broken down, there are 4 basic pillars to the pursuit of wisdom: the desire for wisdom, sound advice, study, and life experience. The first pillar is the desire for wisdom, which is the proverbial fuel that drives forward a person who is searching to gain understanding. Without this pillar, the pursuit of wisdom stands incomplete and cannot move forward. Sound advice comes in second. For those who desire to gain wisdom should begin by talking and listening to those who are wiser, who have already walked the path. Next comes study. This simply means thinking on and devoting time and energy to understand what you have heard, as well as gleaning from the wisdom demonstrated by men of the past through the study of literature. Lastly comes life experience. At this point, having pursued the advice of others, studied on, and understood the wisdom that was imparted upon you, one must now go out and gain practical life experience concerning the wisdom that one has attained. In order to gain wisdom, one must have the pillar of desire. One does not simply gain wisdom without trying to find it, for the pursuit of wisdom is long and oftentimes a difficult path to follow. And a person who lacks the desire will simply stray from this path. The Bible, talking on the desire for wisdom, shares, "Blessed are those who find wisdom, those who gain understanding, for she is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold. She is more precious than rubies, and nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand, and in her left hand are riches and honor." This Bible passage shows well the importance of having the desire for wisdom, as well as the value it can have on a person's life. Aristotle, in the Nicomachean Ethics, states, "The origin of action is choice, and that of choice is desire, and reasoning with a view to an end." As stated before, the beginning of the pursuit of wisdom comes to the pillar of desire. Once a person has come to this point of desiring wisdom, one must make a choice on whether to chase wisdom or not. Simply having a desire to gain something, either material or immaterial, is not going to satisfy a person's desire. One could think metaphorically as follows: I desire to get to point B, therefore I must go to point A. The desire for wisdom is, out of all the others, the most important, as shown by Aristotle. This is due to the fact that the origin of action is choice, and the origin of choice is desire. A life filled with wisdom is a beauty to behold. Without the pillar of desire, one will never come to know such a life. Having the desire for wisdom is truly the only way in which one can begin to pursue a life in which wisdom is demonstrated. When studying the issue of wisdom, one would find that the second pillar in the pursuit of wisdom is sound advice. What makes the pillar of advice important is the fact that it enables one to glean from the life experience of others. Proverbs 19:20 declares, "Listen to advice and accept discipline, and at the end you will be counted among the wise." Oftentimes, however, men refuse the advice of others, believing that their own way is the only correct one and thus become a fool. Proverbs 18:2 states, "A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his own opinion." A fine example of just such a person comes from a man named Paris in Homer's Iliad. Paris was the son of King Priam of Troy and was the person credited with beginning the Trojan War. The Trojan War was started when Paris foolishly took Menelaus' wife Helen, who is considered to be the most beautiful woman alive, to himself. Upon the abduction of Helen, Menelaus, who was the king of Sparta, asked the other Greek kings to join him in an expedition against Troy to bring back Helen, thus beginning the Trojan War. 10 long years of fighting go by, and Paris still cannot see past his own wants and wishes. Finally, Antenor, one of the Trojan advisors, who is described by Homer as shrewd and clear-headed, advises, "Hear me, I must speak out what the heart inside me urges. On with it, give Argive Helen back. What profit for us in the long run? Nothing, unless we do exactly as I say." Paris, who continues to be the fool, answers saying, "Stop, Antenor, no more of your hot insistence. It repels me. I say no. I will not give up the woman." Paris's blatant disregard for the advice of others provides a clear picture of a man who has refused wisdom and thus has become a fool. To not accept the advice of others is truly the mark of a foolish person. The wisdom to be gained from others who have come before is both practical, endlessly practical. The advice of others helps provide one with a clear picture of the pitfalls and traps that come with living life to the perspective of one who has already walked the path. One very beautiful example of sound advice being given comes from the story of the brothers Karamazov. In chapter 2 of this work, Father Zosima, an elder and spiritual advisor in the town monastery, speaks to Alyosha, a young monk, about his future. "There will be much for you to do, but I don't doubt of you. And so I send you forth. Christ is with you. Do not abandon him, and he will not abandon you. You will see great sorrow, and in that sorrow you will be happy. This is my last message to you. In sorrow, seek happiness. Work unceasingly, and remember my words henceforth. For although I shall talk with you again, my hours are numbered." This passage provides an excellent example of the wisdom to be gained from the advice of one's elders. Father Zosima demonstrates well the value of advice when he implores Alyosha to work hard and live a joy-filled life with Jesus Christ. The fact that Alyosha, a young man who is just beginning down the path, seeks to spend time with the old monk and glean from his life shows that he is already well on his way in the pursuit of wisdom. Moving on, one would find that the next pillar in the pursuit of wisdom is that of study. Put into more specific terms, this means gleaning from what has been left behind by historical men of wisdom. When pursuing this pillar of study, one would find that an excellent way to do so comes through the great books. When studying the great books, one will find numerous examples of wise men as well as foolish men who made good decisions and men who did not. One fine example of a man who gained wisdom through the pillar of study comes from Father Zosima of the brothers Karamazov. In chapter 2 of book 6, Father Zosima, who went on to become a famous monk, recounts as how a youth he desired to read the Bible. He relates, "I count too my memories of the Bible, which, child as I was very eager to read at home." Father Zosima's testimony provides a clear illustration of a person who, desiring to gain wisdom, sought to study. The pillar of study is one that shows well a person's intentions. For unlike the pillar of sound advice, the pillar of study is one that requires discipline and self-control. For while certainly invaluable, the pillar of sound advice comes without much effort, being that one is merely required to listen in order to gain insight. The pillar of study, on the other hand, is, out of all the others, the most difficult to master. Another outstanding example of gaining wisdom through study comes from the Bible verse 2 Timothy 3:14 through 17. "But as for you, continue in what you have learned and have firmly believed, knowing from whom you have learned it, and how from childhood you have been acquainted with the sacred writings, which are able to make you wise for salvation through Jesus Christ." When one studies the Bible, one begins to glimpse the immense, incredible wisdom of God, the same wisdom in which he used to create the heavens and the earth and the infinite, boundless region of space. And this wisdom has been breathed into him by a book that mere men can study. The verse continues saying, "All scripture is breathed out by God and is profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be competent and equipped for every good work." As well as being an immense ocean of wisdom, the Bible also equips one to handle difficult situations one encounters in life. As shown by the previous examples, the pillar of study is one that cannot be overlooked. For without the use of this pillar, one loses out on the immense wisdom to be gained from the study of wise authors that have come before. By looking at the wisdom of others through history, one can see the reward to be gained from a persistent desire for truth. Through the pillar of study is life with wisdom. Progressing on, one would find that the next step in the pursuit of wisdom comes to the pillar of life experience. Simply put, this means carefully going through the experiences of life and observing well what can be found in wisdom in them. Once one has sought after the advice of others, studied and pondered the advice that was given, as well as on the ideas left behind by men of the past, one must now go forth and gain wisdom through practical life experience. Aristotle, in the dialogue Nicomachean Ethics, speaks of just such a practical wisdom, saying, "Now it is thought to be the mark of a man of practical wisdom to be able to deliberate well about what is good and expedient for himself, and what sort of things conduce to a good life in general." This quote by Aristotle makes the point that the key to handling everyday situations and circumstances comes through practical wisdom. When a person wishes to gain wisdom through life experience, this person, over time, begins to mature through the difficult and varying experience that one will encounter. Before this time of gaining wisdom through experience, one merely possessed the wisdom acquired through the advice of others as well as the pillar of study. Now, having gone into the world and gained real life experience, one will begin to mature and improve upon the wisdom that one already possesses. A fine example of a person going out into the world and gaining practical life experience comes from the Odyssey, and more specifically, the story of Telemachus. Telemachus, who is 20 at the time of the story, is living with his mother Penelope. His father Odysseus has been gone for 20 years, and his mother is now surrounded by suitors, all of which are desperately trying to gain her hand in marriage. Telemachus, as expected, is an obstacle to the suitors who are desperately courting Penelope. Unfortunately, despite his courage and good heart, he initially lacks the wisdom and confidence to oppose them. In chapter 1 of the book, Telemachus is described as follows. He too was sitting there unhappy among the suitors, a boy, daydreaming. What if his great father came from the unknown world and drove these men like dead leaves to the palace, recovering honor and lordship in his own dominions? And this text clearly shows the fact that Telemachus is uncertain and lacks the practical wisdom required to deal with the issue of the suitors. It is only when Athena, the goddess of wisdom, who is disguised as a man named Mentor, appears and advises him on how to handle the situation that he makes his move. Athena states, "If I were you, I should take steps to make these men disperse. Listen now and attend to what I say. At daybreak, call the islanders to assembly and speak you well. And call the gods to witness. The suitors must go scattering to their homes." Athena also tells Telemachus that he must go on a voyage to learn if his father is alive or not. Telemachus takes Athena's wisdom to heart and proceeds by first telling the suitors that they must leave. He states, "I shall tell you, take it as you will. You are to leave this hall. Go feasting elsewhere, consume your own stores, turn and turn about. Use one another's houses. I beg Zeus, you shall get what you deserve here, a slaughter, and nothing paid for it." Soon after this, Telemachus sets sail to search for his father. He first goes to King Nestor of Pylos, who had fought with Odysseus in the Trojan War. Nestor tells him, however, that he does not know what has happened to Odysseus, and that he is unsure whether the king is alive or not. Nestor also says that he prays Athena will show Telemachus the compassion that she showed Odysseus. He adds that he has heard that the suitors have taken over the prince's house again in Ithaca, and that he hopes he will be able to drive them out. Telemachus then goes to King Menelaus, where he learns that his father is still alive and has been imprisoned by Calypso on her island. His spirit lifted by the good news, Telemachus sets sail for home. Soon after, Telemachus arrives in Ithaca, where he eventually finds Odysseus, who had escaped the island of Calypso. Now together at last, the two men are able to drive out the suitors from the king's home, and thus bring the family back together. This story provides an excellent example of the value of practical wisdom in life. Telemachus, who at the beginning of the story seemed quite incompetent, has now, through the life experience he gained, come to possess a more practical and mature wisdom. Having covered all the pillars of the pursuit of wisdom, one would find that a very fine example of a man who pursued wisdom comes from the character Alyosha in the book The Brothers Karamazov. Throughout the work, Alyosha demonstrates that he has a desire to gain wisdom and makes this evident through the choices he makes. Alyosha first demonstrates that he is willing to glean from the advice of others, as shown through his friendship with Father Zosima. The author of the work writes, Alyosha suddenly announced that he wanted to enter the monastery and that the monks were willing to receive him as a novice. He explained that this was his strong desire and that he was solemnly asking the consent of his father. The old man knew that the elder Zosima, who was living at the monastery hermitage, had made a special impression on his boy. This quotation shows well the heart of Alyosha, who, knowing the wisdom and insight to be gained from the monks at the monastery, decided to take his first step on the path of wisdom. Alyosha also shows competence in the pillar of study, even as a child, as shown in this quote. He was dreamy, for instance, and rather solitary. From his earliest childhood, he was fond of going off in a corner to read. This text shows that even as a youth, Alyosha had the desire to gain wisdom, and did so through the pillar of study. It is also shown through the advice and counsel of Father Zosima that Alyosha, at the time in which he joined the monastery, had come to a place in which he was ready to go out into the world and gain wisdom through practical life experience. Father Zosima, speaking to Alyosha, declares, Remember, young man, when it is God's will to call me, leave this monastery. This is not your place for the time. I bless you for great service in the world. Yours will be a long pilgrimage, and you will have to bear all before you come back. There will be much for you to do, but I don't doubt of you, so I send you forth. Christ is with you. One very fine example of Alyosha displaying wisdom comes from the story of Alyosha in Schoolboys. Alyosha was a proud but frail son of Captain Sneeberkov. In spite of the fact that he is frail and sickly, he gets into frequent fights with his schoolmates, who mock his father for being poor and unable to care for his family. Alyosha's life, however, changes when he throws a stone at Alyosha, who, instead of condemning the boy, takes an interest in him and eventually succeeds in reconciling Alyosha with his schoolmates. Sadly, due to his poor health, Alyosha takes an unfortunate turn for the worse and becomes bedridden, where he ultimately dies. His schoolmates, however, who had once been his enemies, are now his friends due to Alyosha's dedication to them. At the end of the book, Alyosha, who is at the funeral of Alyosha, along with the schoolboys who were his friends, declares, You are all dear to me, boys. From this day I have a place for you in my heart, and I beg you to keep a place in your hearts for me. Well, and who has united us in this kind, good feeling, which we shall remember and remember for all of our lives? Who, if not Alyosha? Let us never forget him. Alyosha continues saying, children, dear friends, don't be afraid of life. How good life is when one does something good and just. Alyosha, through the way in which he handled the situation regarding Alyosha and the schoolboys, shows that he is indeed a man of wisdom. It has been also shown that the way in which Alyosha gained wisdom was due to the fact that he pursued the pillars of wisdom. Through his desire to gain wisdom, Alyosha studied, sought out the advice of others, and gained wisdom through life experiences he went through. Overall, the character of Alyosha Karamazov provides an excellent example of a person who pursued wisdom and thus ultimately became a man of wisdom. In closing, it has been shown that if a person is to thrive and ultimately live a complete life, that person must have the desire to pursue wisdom. It has also been shown that the best way in which to do so is through sound advice, study, and life experience. It has been seen that the desire for wisdom is the first attribute one must possess to begin. For without it, one will never ultimately come to a place in which one is ready to pursue the other pillars of wisdom. The consequences that follow not desiring wisdom are tragic and all too common. And those who have lost, or at no time had the desire to chase one, wind up living an incomplete life. Once a person has decided they wish to pursue wisdom, then they must begin by seeking out the sound advice of others, as well as studying and thinking on what was given. At this point, having chased sound advice and studied, one must now go out into the world to gain practical life experience. The road to wisdom is long and hard, filled with traps and snares ready to lead one astray, but those who continue to pursue wisdom will have their reward. For a life full of wisdom ultimately leads to fulfilled and complete existence. So, pursue wisdom. Strive to live your life every day in a way in which wisdom can be gained. For blessed are those who find wisdom, from those who gain understanding, for she is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold.
Thank you very much, Mr. Botello. I would like to begin by asking you to further explain your section on an exposition of Alyosha's speech at the stone. You do give the very touching comments that he gives to these boys, and I'll have to say I always find those very delightful. However, I'm still left wondering what specific aspect of wisdom his connection to these boys show.
You mean how did Alyosha display wisdom in regards to these boys?
Yes, and particularly in the passages that you recount, what aspect of wisdom is it that he is manifesting in this interaction with the boys?
Well, in the beginning of the story, Alyosha and his schoolmates are at odds. Alyosha ultimately attacks Alyosha. And instead of, deciding to just remove himself from the situation, Alyosha, brings these boys back together, okay? And in my opinion, only a man of wisdom could do that. So my point in telling that story is that Alyosha displays his wisdom in the fact that he is able to bring these boys back together and ultimately make enemies into friends again.
Mm-hmm. So the ability to reconcile those who are lacking in wisdom with each other.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, also you gave another Alyosha quote, and I can find it here. Yes. Okay, this is once again talking about Alyosha and Father Zosima's discussion with Alyosha. Father Zosima says to Alyosha, says, "You will have to bear all before you come back." And that quote is vaguely Christ-like, and it looks like he expects that Alyosha will have a life of suffering. And just to kind of tie in with our previous lecture, where it seemed that Christians were exhorted to take up arms in the progress of war, which oftentimes is waged in order to gain for ourselves, in order to resist evil. My suspicion is someone like Alyosha might purposely go and live in a country such as Saudi Arabia, where Christians bear a tremendous amount. And he would take that burden on willingly. So rather than trying to resist that political order, might purposely go and dwell in amongst that sort of oppressive political order to show God's love to those people there. And so do you think that this expectation of the necessity of bearing suffering is something that, for at least a character like Alyosha, who seems very highly conscientious, would make us seek situations of oppression rather than trying to take up the sword to fight them?
Well, I think for a man like Alyosha, who God has given a kind and forgiving and a generous heart, I think for him that is something he would do. I don't think Alyosha should be the man to take up arms against tyranny. I think he would be the man to go and do his best to help those who are under the tyrant.
All right, thank you very much. You also make a comment. You say, as to in your last your concluding paragraph, it says, "Those who have lost or at no time have the desire to chase wisdom wind up living an incomplete life." And Plato went so far as to say that the unexamined life is not worth living. Particularly harsh. And apparently a life without examination is a life that's not pursuing wisdom. Would you be willing to go so far as to say that if we could take the word wisdom and take that noun and turn it into a verb, so wisdoming,
Okay.
meaning the pursuit of wisdom, would you say there's really not a very big difference between living and wisdoming?
I think that would be I would say living and wisdoming are definitely in directly linked. I think a person who has no desire to gain wisdom and is going through life in a way where they simply don't care is ultimately just not living a truly fulfilled life. And in that sense, you're just not really living at all.
Mm-hmm. Could you compare wisdoming to breathing? Now, obviously, if you're not breathing, you are not living. But we don't say that if you're breathing, you are living. A lot of people who are breathing, you kind of wonder if they are actually living. Now, breathing is, of course, a necessary requirement for life. If you're not breathing, you're not living. Is the relationship of wisdoming to living of a similar nature?
Well, wisdoming is not ultimately necessary to life. It is necessary if you wish to live a fulfilled and complete life. If you are satisfied with living a dull and just not a true life, then yes, don't pursue wisdom. But if your desire is to live life to the fullest extent, then you truly need to pursue wisdom.
All right, thank you very much. And one last question. Is this phrase merely redundant, or is there a particular special meaning that you have to it? You brought up the expression practical life experience. And the first question that came to my mind is seeing that phrase, I was wondering what would impractical life experience be? So is that a redundancy, or do you have something other in mind by qualifying life experience by the term practical? Practical comes from praktikos in Greek, meaning doing. So that seems to be the idea of life experience is doing. So is there some other meaning that you're giving to it by applying that other term to it?
No, there's not. When I say practical wisdom, I mean wisdom that is going to help you in your day-to-day life. You know, stuff that you can think back to and say, well, you know, this is what happened last time I was in this situation. Maybe I should make the other decision. And so there you go. You have avoided, you know, something that could be unpleasant due to your past experiences.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Botello. Other questions?
Mackenzie.
Great paper. I loved it. Would you say that wisdom obviously is the basis of your paper, and you say that this is key to living life to the fullest, but would you say that there are also other characteristics to living life to the fullest also?
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Wisdom is only one part of living a complete life. That's not what my paper is about, like the other parts of life, but there's definitely, in my mind, certainly other things that you can do to live a fulfilled life. Quote.
What would you say the difference between knowledge and wisdom is in your paper?
Knowledge is knowing what 2 + 2 equals. And wisdom is knowing how to deal with situations and maneuver the different obstacles that you encounter in life.
So could you have knowledge without wisdom, or wisdom without knowledge?
Knowledge without wisdom, or wisdom. Okay, what?
So could you have a lot of knowledge but not be wise, and could you be wise and not have a lot of knowledge?
I could say, you know, you can think of, a scholar, you know, a mathematician, someone who knows a lot, who is very knowledgeable about, you know, what he studies, reading, math, whatever it may be. Yet he could be, you know, an unbeliever and at that point really lack wisdom.
So that brings us to the next little portion of the question. Can a non-believer have wisdom, true wisdom, or just knowledge?
I don't think a non-believer can truly have wisdom. I think they can have knowledge disguised as wisdom, but I think true wisdom only comes from God and a relationship with God.
Fear the Lord. Going off of Chloe's question, what would you say, coming from your definition of wisdom in your paper, where would you put Christ as the source of wisdom and living as a Christian seeking wisdom in that way? How would you centralize that around Christ, or was that a different type of wisdom you were addressing?
So you mean how do you pursue wisdom with God as your ultimate goal, or kind of like that?
Yeah.
Well, obviously reading the Bible, praying to God, asking Him for wisdom, just like Solomon did. I mean, Solomon got wisdom. So, as far as that goes, that's how I would go about that. Yeah. Sure.
Mine is really going off of everybody else. But it says in Proverbs, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Could you say that's almost a fifth pillar to wisdom? You laid out four, beginning with desire for wisdom. I guess in what way would that fit in with the four pillars that you described?
Well, yeah, like I said before, I think true wisdom only comes from God, and a relationship with God comes with a fear of God. So yeah, I'd say I think that could be a fifth pillar, definitely.
One of the quotes you used from Ethics is, you said, "Now it is thought to be the mark of a man of practical wisdom to be able to deliberate well about what is good and expedient for himself." And a lot of the studying we get from the great books, we look at the lives of orators and how a lot of people will come and speak for large groups of clueless people who will just kind of follow along. So in what way is that wise? Because if it's the mark of a man of practical wisdom to just be able to talk to anyone and convince them of anything, how can that be wise? That kind of seems like manipulation, like a lion going after a little lamb.
Well, I would say to that question that there are always going to be people who misuse their gifts and what they have. There's always going to be people who want to lead people astray, and people who have the power to do that. But there's also always going to be men who, fight to reverse that process, and you need wisdom to do that. So basically what I'm trying to say is there's a perverted wisdom where you lead people astray, and there is a different wisdom where you try to lead people to the light, basically, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Aaron?
You said that true wisdom cannot be achieved without a relationship with God. But for instance, there's a physicist named Michio Kaku, he's Japanese, and he said that through his study of physics and the universe, that he has led himself to believe in God, and so knowledge has led to belief in God. And also, there is a Buddhist monk called Gandhi, I'm sure you guys have heard of him, who says, "Prayer is not asking, it is a daily longing of the soul. It is a daily admission of one's weakness." So do you not think that wisdom is something that is instilled in human nature, that can be developed if you take the right path? And do you also think that wisdom can be achieved without having a relationship with God, but that seeking wisdom leads to belief in God?
I think, oh gosh, that's a hard question. Yeah, we've read Plato, or I think it was Socrates. But, he believed that he had truly gained wisdom. Yet I don't think Socrates, was a Christian. Now, like I said, I think there is knowledge disguised as wisdom, and I would say that, yes, if you are not in a relationship with God, I would say you probably cannot have truly the wisdom of God. I don't think you can get that without a relationship with God. You can come close and have lots of knowledge disguised as wisdom, and it sounds good, but I think without God, I don't think you're going to get there. Rachel.
So in your paper, you present extremely different examples of when someone applied wisdom. So I guess my question is, does wisdom's definition change on the person? And if so, how can we be sure when to apply wisdom and what it actually is?
I think different people are going to have different ways in which they demonstrate wisdom. Can you kind of define more your question a little bit?
Yeah, just if wisdom seems to be very different per person in your example specifically, like, you know, the Odyssey versus the guy, again, I can't pronounce his name very well.
Yeah.
But they're extremely different, but you say they both use wisdom. So maybe showing how their wisdom was in some way the same, or why was their wisdom so different? And if it is different, did wisdom itself change, or was it just the person who changed?
Wisdom did not change. Wisdom is just a very broad term for a way in which you can go through life and make choices that are going to help you and others around you. So in that respect, wisdom can have many different faces. So I guess that's how I would answer that. So I don't think wisdom has changed from those two examples. I just think it's larger than just two different types.
Okay, and I guess one follow-up is just like, why would you say that? Like, how do you mean that?
How do I mean?
Well, you kind of give a statement in that way, but like examples of where the wisdom was applied, because they're different applications, but why specifically does wisdom not change then?
Well, like I said, I think wisdom is having the ability to go through life and make choices that are good for you and those around you. And choices change from situation to situation. Okay, so, you know, Paris's choice was different than, you know, Alyosha's choice. So, you know, it was a different kind of wisdom that he used. And while he still either made an unwise choice or a wise choice, he was still using wisdom.
So the circumstances are what changed, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You said that, I enjoyed the paper first of all, but you said that the first pillar was desire, and I was just wondering, it seems that you can't get wisdom without this desire to obtain wisdom. That's like the first main thing. But what if someone just doesn't have this desire? Is there a way to kindle a desire for wisdom in others if they don't have that to begin with? Is there a way a teacher or a parent could do that for someone?
Yeah, I think, you know, a perfect example. You know, we go to GBT, and I would say that not all of us at the beginning of GBT had a desire to gain wisdom. But I would say that by listening to Mr. Henricks and reading these authors that demonstrated wisdom in the works they left behind, I think a passion and a desire to gain wisdom can be kindled in one who does not have that desire to begin with. Olivia?
All right. You talked about Solomon in the beginning with people,
Yeah.
how he was the example ultimately of someone who had achieved full wisdom. And Solomon, as you know, wrote Proverbs, and he wrote Song of Solomon, and showed that he had the ability, because of his God-given wisdom, to express full love and full understanding of a lot of things. But Solomon also wrote Ecclesiastes, in which he talks a lot about everybody knows the phrase vanity, vanity, always vanity. And do you think his, because he was in such despair, was because he had so much wisdom? Is it worth, I guess what I'm trying to ask is it worth having to bear maybe seeing that the world around you does not achieve the joy of wisdom, or is wisdom to some extent a burden that you have to, it's like a standard that you don't see other people living up to, obviously you don't live up to yourself. Is it worth seeing a lot of things as vanity to have the weight of wisdom?
So basically the question is, can wisdom be a burden? Is that
Yeah.
I think it can be a burden. I think it can definitely be hard to observe people who are not living a life with wisdom, but I also think it's a burden worth bearing. Yes.
In your paper, you discuss different ways to gain wisdom.
Yes, sir.
And I was wondering, do you have any guidelines you would say are good for balancing those different ways? Because obviously we shouldn't just sit in the house reading all day long and never go out and have real life experience. So how would you say we should balance it?
Well, anything you do needs to be balanced. So it's not a good idea to read for 8 hours in your house. So with everything you do, there needs to be balance. Okay, you don't want to go, hang out with the pastor at church all day, every day. That would not be balanced. So with everything you do, there must be balance, and that goes for these pillars as well. Jared.
Yeah, so you start out your paper with a lot of awesome Bible verses and all that, and I perceive that you were embracing a sort of biblical definition of wisdom kind of at the beginning of the paper. And yet when you turn to your subsection of practical experience, right, you're saying that wisdom is essentially the capability to make decisions that benefit ourselves. And I agree that those are both very good definitions. However, isn't it true that there are many times where those two ideas of wisdom can conflict with each other? And I'll give you an example. According to biblical wisdom, there's the principle, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. Well, that seems to fly in the face of what you would say is practical wisdom, right? Because in practical wisdom, everyone is trying to be first, but it would seem that in biblical wisdom, it's reversed. So I was just wondering, how would you reconcile the difference between the two, and do you believe that they can't be reconciled?
That's a very interesting question. I honestly do not know how I would reconcile those. Emma?
Great job on your paper, by the way. So I understand what Hannah was talking about with the first pillar, the desire for wisdom. That makes sense that that's the first thing that comes whenever you're seeking to acquire wisdom. But is there an order that comes with the other three of sound wisdom, studying, and life experience? Like, do you have to study historical authors and learn from their experience before you can actually gain wisdom from experience?
I don't think that they have to be in order. I just put them in that order for my paper. Those are just things that I think you need to do in order to achieve wisdom. You can be doing them all at once, or you can do them one at a time. But either way, those are things that I think are necessary tools for wisdom. Yes, Jordan.
I was just really interested in the relationship between sound advice and study. You kind of contrast them in the paper, but at the same time, the way you talk about them, there's almost a similarity between the two. Like sound advice, you listen to someone. Study, you're listening to someone from a long time ago who's probably dead and not talking to you right now. So is there a similarity?
Yeah, I'd say there's a similarity. I think the one difference, though, I would say is wisdom from, Father Zosima has its limits. But if you look at wisdom, all the wisdom left behind by all of the men of the past who have written works, it's endless. So I'd say they're similar in the respect that you are observing from the lives of others, but different in the fact that one is limited and one is not.
Kind of a follow-up question.
Yes.
How do you distinguish who to take advice from and who to study. Because there is, like you said, kind of a wide range of everything, but there are some that, you know, what they have to say is very much against what is wise and what is good and righteous. And it seems that your pursuit of wisdom does have a lot of biblical parallels, so it's very much pursuit of God. So how do you distinguish among the wide field of people offering their ideas of wisdom?
I would say a way to distinguish that would be asking yourself the question, is reading this author going to benefit me, or is it going to be something that drags me down? I think that's a great question to ask, because there are certainly authors that will drag you down. There's certainly authors that will lift you up. So I'd say that's a good way to decide what to study. Maxie?
So one of your pillars is study. Do you think you could gain wisdom without that? And why I ask that is there's those who are illiterate and can't read, or people who maybe don't have the resources like books to read. So could you gain wisdom with that?
Yeah, I think you could gain wisdom. I still think you need to have a faith in God. But the thing with having God is he will meet you halfway every time. So you may not have the resources to study, you may not have anybody to talk to, but as long as you have God, he will always meet you halfway and do whatever it needs to help you. So yeah.
You talked about wisdom, advice being in the wisdom. What about, let's say someone hypothetically does not have achieved what we would consider full wisdom or enough wisdom to be able to live a full life. And they receive some what we consider unsound advice or wrong advice in the aspect of a Christian worldview and lifestyle. How would you have them address that? Especially if they are still seeking for wisdom, but they receive and they're trying to look for wisdom not only through studying and experience, but also through this advice they're looking for from someone, but it's not correct.
Basically, how do you deal with someone who has
the wrong ideas?
Has the wrong ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Pairing them up with people that you know to be wise is a way. Talking issues out with them. Those are really the only ways. Pointing them to God. It's hard to reverse bad ideas and bad thoughts. But I'd say those are a few ways in which you can do that. Yes?
Say that you have a deep relationship with God, but then you leave Him. Can you still gain wisdom even when you've left Him?
No, I don't think so. I think if you have a relationship with God and you forfeit that, you forfeit your right to have true wisdom. Because true wisdom only comes from God. You are displaying a serious lack of wisdom by leaving God. Mr. Hendricks.
Yeah, in the discussion, or in the description of Solomon's wisdom, it seems to be a sort of very intellectual wisdom. He talks about how he knew all the plants and animals, he had people come to him for political advice, he was a writer, a lot of sort of kind of heady things that are described as parts of his wisdom. How does wisdom look in terms of those who may be mentally deficient? And it may be, certainly there obviously is mental deficiency in those who do not choose to develop their minds. But there are some who simply, like some are weak in body or sick in body, some people are sick in mind. Right. Their wisdom is never going to take a very, you might say, refined intellectual form. What is wisdom going to look like in somebody of that nature?
Well, like I told someone, first of all, God is always going to meet them halfway if they have a faith in Him. And gosh, as far as people with mental disabilities, I really don't know how wisdom can be displayed in their life. I have observed with people with issues like that they are very, very loving towards everybody. And I think that is a way in which God kind of just helps them along. Well, maybe they can't be intellectually smart, they are going to be a light for Him and give people a smile. So I guess that's my best answer for that one.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. Other questions?
Mr. Carr?
With your fellow GBT5 students getting ready to head off, many of them in a new life, a new experience, of the 4 pillars that you mentioned, which one would you suggest they pursue first in their new adventures?
Having a desire for wisdom, definitely. Having a desire for wisdom is going to help you to stay close to God. And if you have that, then you're set.
Thank you very much, Mr. Botello. All right, we have a short break. We'll continue on the next one momentarily.
Smart, you did work.